Hello there, welcome to saberduelgaming, where we always take the high ground. Now you will know by now that I am a lover of Star Wars games, and I have reviewed quite a few Star Wars games that I have played in depth over the years. But today we're going to be looking at a Star Wars game that I had never actually played. Star Wars Republic Commando, a retro review. Republic Commando was released in 2005 for the PC and Xbox, but it's the Xbox version I'm going to be reviewing. And this game achieved something right from the start, and that was managing to make a Star Wars game that felt fresh and new. Most Star Wars games that we had played through the years had focused either on space combat or playing as characters with lightsabers, be that Jedi or Sith. Instead, this game focused on the Republic Commandos, a variation of the Clone Troopers. Now, the Clone Troopers were quite iconic and popular characters already. In 2005, they'd been seen in both Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, and of course Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. So they were well established and quite iconic characters well before the game came out. And the game focuses on a special group of clones called Scorch, Sev, Fixer, and your character, Boss. These Republic Commandos are a special unit of highly trained clone troopers, specifically trained by Jango Fett himself. It struck me very quickly just how familiar this felt, very similar to Bad Batch, and it's probably no coincidence that the game was re-released on the PS4 and Nintendo Switch in 2021, when Bad Batch the show came out as well. Very much like the Bad Batch team, Delta Squad operates very much as a unit rather than solo soldiers. While it is a first-person shooter, you can give commands to other members of your squad, sending them to defend a point, to operate a device, while the rest of you continue to fight. You can also, when injured, call on them to come and heal you, and you to do the same for them. And let me be clear, working as a team in this game is not optional. It's the only way you're going to have any chance of getting through it, because this game carries with it quite a hefty challenge, which we'll talk about a bit more later. Visually, it's something of a mixed bag. The graphics themselves actually are pretty damn good. They were certainly very good at the time and stand up from what I can see very well now. However, the locations themselves don't lend themselves to a particularly exciting graphical choice. Geonosis, for example, is pretty much exclusively brown. It's just all rock, and most of the other levels that we see don't offer a great deal of graphical variety either. That said, what is on screen is done very well, so it can't really be complained about too much. The audio too is pretty good. You have a number of standard Star Wars tunes, as well as an original score. The voice acting in it is slightly jarring, however. Tamura Morrison is on board, the voice actor who also played Jango Fett and voices all the clones, and yet he only voices some of the Republic Commandos. Others have different voice acting, and while I kind of understand the reason for this, if they're all speaking in the background with the same voice it's going to get a little confusing. It doesn't really make any sense from a Star Wars perspective. They're clones, and these don't even have the excuse like Bad Batch where they've been specifically genetically modified. They should all have the same voice. That's probably nitpicking for many, but for hardcore Star Wars fans, that is a little bit annoying. The overall gameplay itself is fine. It's a standard first-person shooter with a degree of teamwork involved. You start off with a number of weapons, and you can pick up different weapons as you work around, including some weapons from the enemies. As far as first-person shooters go, the gameplay has a fair bit of depth. However, there was a couple of factors I picked up on playing this. The first issue was, for some reason, I felt a serious disconnect between me and my character when firing the weapon. Maybe it was because of the lack of reaction from the characters I was shooting, or the lack of movement in the weapon itself. I don't know. But I didn't have this issue when playing games as far back as Doom. For some reason, I just didn't really feel like I was connecting in the same way. And then there's the difficulty issue. And trust me, I looked online, it is not just me that finds this one a little bit jarring. It's not just that it's difficult in the levels, it's the fact that even a simple droid or Geonosian takes so many blasts to kill, you'd think you were taking on a Sith Lord. And depending on how well your teammates hold up, it's the difference between whether you're going to survive a level or not. That's usually outside of your control, so it can get a little frustrating. But how was this game received when it first came out? Well, within the first year, it sold 60,000 copies in the UK alone, but its scores were kind of a mixed bag. You see, this game garnered between the low to high 70% marks usually. There was a couple of 8 out of 10s, but there was a few lower also. The thing that surprised me most is just how positively and favourably people remember this game, and yet nobody at the time actually rated it that highly. This maybe feels like one of those games that if it didn't have the Star Wars license and references to the Star Wars films, it probably wouldn't be remembered as fondly as it is. As for looking at this with modern scrutiny, well, that's going to be easy. I didn't play this back in 2005 when it first came out, and actually only played it for the first time last year. Overall, it was fun jumping into a Star Wars universe from a different perspective. However, there is a couple of snags. I don't think it feels as natural as it could do. I can't quite put my finger on why, but there's just something uncomfortable about the play. And at the risk of angering the slightly more pretentious retro gamers out there, I do think the early difficulty curve gets in the way of you slowly becoming more comfortable with the game. It's difficult trying to learn the basics whilst you're also struggling to stay alive. A lot of people will point that games always used to be a bit more challenging and this was a good thing, but the reality is, the first levels of games like Doom, Duke Nukem and even GoldenEye were a breeze to get through and let you get more comfortable in the game. This just doesn't do that. Despite these flaws, Republic Commando is still a really good game. I'm just not sure that we'd think it was as good as it was if it wasn't Star Wars. So for that, I think a 6.5 out of 10 is fair. But what do you think?